This afternoon, we have the pleasure of visiting with Anna Schachner in our latest installment of the Headlight Review interview series with authors. And Anna is a multi-talented soul who has written a novel, You and I and Someone Else, that was published by Mercer Press 2016, I believe, Anna?
17.
17.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Anna also contributes to The Guardian. She is a professor emeritus at Georgia State University and previously was the editor of the Chattahoochee Review. Anna also served as the finalist judge for our inaugural Anthony Grooms Prize in Fiction this year, and from a multitude of entries chose 52 Pickup by Anita Lo, who is a terrific young writer from New York, and we're set to publish that very soon, and we thank her for that, for her contributions for helping us to get the prize kicked off in such a strong way. So Anna, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for
Good.
having me.
It's always
Happy
good
to
to
be
see
here.
you. Yeah, it's always good to see you. And so, as you know, a couple of writers just sort of hanging out and talking. My first lob to you is what are you working on? What are you doing? What have you finished lately that you like or don't like, or just any old thing you want to talk about?
Well, that's a great question for me right now because I can do a little bit of bragging, which I normally can't do much of in terms of my writing because I tend to be very slow in my projects. But I am literally finishing up like the final touches on a flash fiction collection. And I say flash fiction because most of the pieces are flash, but there are a couple of longer stories in there as well that just fit thematically and I thought really would kind of help balance out the book as well. So I hope that's with my writing group right now. And I'm adding a couple of little tiny one-liners that I've just written, which I might read one of later. But I expect it to be done and ready to be shopped within a month or so. So that's been what I'm, been my focus for, I guess, about 2 years now. I've had a lot of crazy things happen in the 2 years, so it's taken me there again a long time to get it done. And then I'm looking forward to getting back into like novel writing, which I'll do in January.
That's wonderful. And what was the draw to flash fiction? Is that just an organic thing to you that you just became interested in it over time, or?
When I first started writing, like many, many years ago when I was a kid, I mean, years and years and years ago, I started out writing poetry. But I was never very good at poetry because I tend to rely on narrative too much. So all my poems just kind of sounded like the same thing over and over again. This long narrative that really should have been something else. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, I discovered that I could lie pretty convincingly. So I thought, writing, lying, I should be writing fiction. So I started writing fiction, and You and I and Someone Else, the novel that you mentioned that came out a few years back, it actually started as a sort of flash collection itself. I was very influenced by The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, which came out back in the 80s and was like sort of the cornerstone of one of the Chicana movement. And so I wrote uh, that book as a flash kind of collection, but more in a novelistic way as well. It wasn't necessarily separate things. They were little short pieces that connected in a novelistic way. And had some interest in it, but it didn't ultimately get published. And so I decided to rewrite it as a more, linear, chronological novel when I did. And it got published. So I've always been interested in both poetry and novels, and having had the novel that started as Flash, I felt like I had some experience with that. And the Flash has become so popular and so like in vogue right now that I thought I should go back to Flash because I love it. I love the brevity of it, and I love the play with the language, and the fact too that if you start something and you screw it up, you haven't wasted like 2 years like you might on a novel. Then the risk or the
True.
danger isn't quite as bad as it might be with a novel. And I just started doing it, and the actual idea for the collection, how these little tiny pieces might coalesce and become an actual collection, came to me when I wrote the very first piece, actually, that I put in the collection, which was inspired by the fact that I had this huge oak tree in my front yard that was like 100 years old. That was like one of the big reasons why I had bought the house that I live in now. and it had to come down. It got very diseased, and it just about killed me because that tree was like so special to me. And so when that tree came down, I thought, well, I'm going to write a little homage to that tree, and I want to write a little flash piece and see what happens with that. So I did. And then I thought, I'm very interested in trees at large. So I started doing all this research into like famous trees in the world because there were quite a few. And then I thought I'll also write about animals a lot. I kind of see maybe the animal tree thing going. So anyway, my flash fiction collection became connected by trees and animals.
Anna, does the piece come to you as flash or do you set out to write a flash story? When you have an idea for a story, do you say, do you let that thing do what it wants to do, or do you set about saying, okay, I want to write a flash story, let me go look for something to write about?
Well, before I got so intent on writing a flash fiction collection, I used to do the sort of, I'm going to start writing something and see where it takes me approach. But then when I decided that I wanted to, get the collection done and have it ready, and get it out in the world, I started to write with the idea that I was going to write Flash. And there are divisions in terms of word length within the Flash world. And so I would say, well, I've got some pieces that are already 500 words. I could use some longer ones. So I would kind of start with that idea as well, like what kind of word length I wanted to have. Um, but in most cases, even before I got to that point, there's some I call them regalos, which is the Spanish word for gifts. Little things that I collect either in my writing journal or just in my memory, little things that just sort of speak to me that are just normal kind of things I see in the world every day, whether it's an image or a piece of conversation or a leaf in a particular angle on the sidewalk or whatever. I sometimes will start with one of those. In fact, I just read an interview with Pam Houston, who's a
Mm-hmm.
fiction writer that I admire very much. And she does a lot of really great teaching and workshops and all these other great things too. And in the interview, she was talking about what she calls glimmers. And they're more or less the same things that I call regalos, which are those little things that, they just stick with you for some reason. They pique your interest or they make you remember something and you end up writing about them later. So uh, with some of the flash pieces, I started with a regalo
Mm-hmm.
that I'd been thinking about. And in fact, the last longer piece of flash that I put in the collection came from a regalo that I had in a recent trip to Italy,
Mm-hmm.
where I was visiting a olive oil and vineyard outside of Siena. And the woman who was running the place we were having lunch came up to us and said, "Oh, it's almost time for Ernesto to come." And I was like, "Who's Ernesto?" Who's Ernesto? And she's like, "Oh, he's a dog. You'll see." And so, about 10 minutes later, I'll look out into the olive groves, and here's this little white spot moving closer and closer and closer and closer. And it was Ernesto, and he's this dog that apparently just shows up every day at this farm for lunch. No one knows where he lives, or so there's sort of a mythic quality to all that. So that is something that I wrote down in my little notebook, and I ended up writing a flash piece about
Oh,
just to give you an idea. Yeah.
that's fantastic. And this is a finished story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Anna, when you were at the Chattahoochee, when you were editor at Chattahoochee, was there was did you see a lot of strong flash submissions? It seemed to, this is my question. Did it seem to be growing when you were there? Its popularity and its your interest in it, was that, did you being an editor, did that affect any of that?
Well, I think that it did grow in popularity during the years that I was there, but I don't think it had reached the point where it is now, because that's been
Right.
like, what, almost 4 years since I did any editing for the Chattahoochee. We didn't actually get a lot of flash, but it was odd because we also didn't get a lot of nonfiction, but the pieces of nonfiction and the pieces of flash that we got tended to be really good. So, I mean, in the years that I was at the Chattahoochee, I'm gonna guess that we might have published, I don't know, maybe 15 pieces of flash. Um, and they were all really, really good. But we didn't get a lot. So I can't say that, I went through stacks of those submissions.
Anna, do you think that the internet has an effect on the popularity of Flash or the emphasis on Flash, internet publishing, online publishing? Does that factor into it?
Yes. I think there's a oh, this is going to sound snarky, but I don't mean it to. But I think there's a kind of flash that's been very popular, especially with the online zines, some of them anyway, not all of them, because there's some great online magazines right now that do flash.
I agree.
But you know, they all tend to be sort of acclimated towards like either the surreal, where there's not necessarily any kind of linear, you know, logic to what's going on, but it's more about the language, or they're just gritty. You know, they're really, really gritty. And I think that's great. I mean, there's some great pieces of flash that, you know, happen in both of those categories. And there's just certainly a ton of great flash happening everywhere, but it's gotten very competitive.
Yeah.
Because it used to be if you wrote flash, you were kind of, you know, a little bit of a underdog, but now everybody's doing it. So it's gotten very competitive, which is good because I think that makes, you know, what gets published even better.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been told by editors that have online journals that, you know, anything over 2,500 words is just going to be a challenge for a reader. Not that the story wouldn't be good or they're not interested in publishing good fiction, but it's just there's an expectation now of the online reader in a literary journal that they need to be able to read a story in 10 minutes.
Yep.
And which I not to, what do you say? My opinion is particularly germane here, but I agree with everything you're talking about with Flash. You know, I teach it now in my classes a lot more than I used to. And one of our readers is a Flash reader. Did you teach Flash when you were teaching fiction writing? Did you teach a lot of that?
I did. In fact, I taught, I think the last 3 years that I taught creative writing, both at the college, the university at Georgia State, and also in the prison program that
Okay.
I taught in, which I loved and miss very much. I designed a course on Flash, both nonfiction and fiction. And so that's all we did. And I found that in the, you know, the 20 something years that I taught creative writing, that was the easiest for me to teach students. And I think it goes back to that thing you were saying about attention spans and
Uh-huh.
expectations in terms of what you can expect from the reader and all that. But I also think it plays into that risk thing that I was sort of laughing about earlier, which is that, you know, students, when they're new to creative writing, they're afraid of, you know, messing up. And I think that it allowed them in 500 words to, you know, make a mistake and then go back and start over if they had to. So I found those classes to be um, really, I think, helpful in terms of my getting to the students what I wanted to, you know, to convey and to teach them. And I had some great pieces come out of those classes, both there again at the college and at the prison. In fact, one of my students at the prison, this has been about probably 6 years ago, we sent her work and another student's work to a flash fiction, no, flash nonfiction, forgive me, contest at a magazine. And one of my students won first place and the other one won honorable mention.
Wow,
So, yeah. So, I mean,
that's
we got
great.
some really, because I mean, you know, unfortunately, in a prison setting, you have nothing but people with really, really powerful stories to tell.
Yeah.
So, you know, you just tap into that, and it does it for, you know, the work itself. So,
Not to just spend our whole afternoon talking about this, but I do have another question for you on Flash. Do you think it simplifies writing? It simplifies storytelling in a way that it cuts down on the
no,
demand?
I
It's still,
don't.
you
I
still
think
have to tell a story, right?
you still have to tell a story, and I think to me the challenge of Flash is the honing. You know, because I tend to be kind of long-winded in my. I like a long, pretty sentence, you know, and you have to hone and hone and hone. But also, I think that what Flash makes you do is it makes you think about connections and how
Uh-huh.
obvious connections between the ideas need to be or not need to be.
Yeah.
And I think the trend there again, as Flash becomes more and more popular, the thinking behind it seems to be that the connections don't have to be all that obvious. You know, you can ask the reader in those 500 words or 750 or 1,000 to make some jumps, you know, and I think that's to me a challenge because you have to sort of think about that and figure that out as you're working your way through the piece.
Yeah.
You know, to me, the pretty language and the imagery and all that creates the conciseness and the brevity in a piece of flash, as it does in a piece of poetry, is the easy part. It's making those connections and getting the arc of the story in there, so that it's coherent enough for the reader.
Yeah.
That's what I love about it.
Yeah. I suppose that a writer's, each writer's sense of story would be in play. You know, like
Exactly.
we learn about what a story is, we read the textbooks, but in fact, that's a pretty particular thing in the end, right?
It is. It's very particular. And you also have to play to your strengths, I think,
That's
when
right.
you write.
Exactly right.
And that to me is also a challenge with the flash form, because I mean, I don't think my strength there, again, as I said, is necessarily being brief, but I do think that conciseness and articulation are things that, once you start writing novels, you can sort of forget about sometimes. So flash is good in that it also reinforces other kinds of writing. It just makes you think about those conciseness and articulations as well. So
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. I could do it the rest of my writing career, but I don't think I want to stay that one laned, so to speak.
Yeah. But the idea that you and I and someone else came from a Flash, I would have never put that together. You know what I mean?
Well,
I would
that's
never
great.
put that together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I worried that the seams would show when I did sort of start stitching those things together into chapters. I was very worried that the seams would show, but that was, and actually that was probably a good exercise for me as a writer too. As trying to make something where the seams didn't show. So
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. It just seems like that. What do you say? The path is always like that. Be true to what's happening as you write. Like you have an idea, it's going to be something, and then it wants to be something else. And when it wants to be something else, you have to let it be something else.
Right.
Right.
That's the discovery thing that we always tell our students, right?
That's exactly right. That's what I tell them. But that's
That's
my
what
own
I tell them
experience
too.
too. It's just like, hey, you have to just have the, and I think that's intuition, probably experience, probably comes in there at some point, and just trusting it, trusting the winding road or the whatever whatever little sudden turn you have to take. Okay, now I want to shift gears here for a sec, and I wanted to talk to you about Atlanta and how Atlanta has shaped you as a fiction writer. How long have you lived in Atlanta? I know you're from Charlotte originally, right?
I'm from Charlotte. I grew up in Augusta. We moved from Charlotte to Augusta when I was almost 12. But I still consider myself a North Carolinian. I've always thought of Atlanta, even though I've loved it for the most part being here. I've always thought of it sort of, a long visit. Because I'm just itching to get back to North Carolina. But I think Atlanta has been a great place for me as a writer. I mean, in editing the Chattahoochee for 10 years, I was very much a part of a big national, sometimes international literary community, which was great. But Atlanta is so full of so many great writers from all different genres, at all different stages of their careers. And despite those differences, has been a very, I think, tight little literary community. I think that COVID has changed that a little bit, because I think a couple of the things that helped make it so tight, the Decatur Book Festival, which if you're from Atlanta, you know it very well. It was part of that. Um, but the Townsend Prize for Fiction that I also directed, I think was a part of that, because I got to know a lot of writers, and I'm I'm very keen on the idea of community, whether it's in the classroom or in the writing community at large, or paying back to the community. Like when I was editing the Chattahoochee Review, we did a bunch of community workshops for veterans that remain to this day, one of my big, I think, accomplishments in terms of that editing job. But having such a tight knit community, um, you see in action in Atlanta the support that other writers give, to each other. Because I think sometimes if you're not in this world, or sometimes if you're just new to the writing world, you think of it as being competitive and sort of backstabbing, because let's face it, everybody's trying to get a book out, right? But Atlanta, people will support you. Everybody goes to each other's book launches, and I just feel like it's a great place to be
Yeah.
if you want to write. So I've been very lucky to have been here. I feel that very much, and have been part of the Townsend as well. So
Yeah. I think that Tony Grooms was probably my, what would you say, meeting him and getting to know him was sort of my path into the Atlanta writing community when I moved here, which would have been in 2006 or seven. And he was at Kennesaw, and was going on a Fulbright, and so they needed somebody to come in and teach his graduate class. And I went up and applied for the job. Bill Holman, who's somebody else that you and I both know, was the
yeah,
one who said, "Hey, they're
love
looking
him.
for somebody."
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And anyway, but so when we named this prize for Tony this year, I think that was what do you say? I feel like that was a meaningful thing to do, to honor a guy who's really been a key part of the literary community in Atlanta. And I know he's still writing. He's still out there. He just doesn't have to go to work like the rest of us do, I guess. But so could you talk a little bit about Tony?
Yeah, in fact, when you asked me how long I've been in Atlanta, I was thinking I've been here, I think 30, 32 years,
That is.
about 32 years. Yeah, I came thinking I would be here 6 months, and then a bunch of stuff happened, and yeah, so 32 years later. But I think when I got my job at what was originally DeKalb College and then Georgia Perimeter College, the first conference that I went to, if I recall, was a conference at Kennesaw, the 20th Century Literature Conference. I think that's what it was. Am I right? Okay. And if I remember correctly, that was where I met Tony Grooms. Because I gave a paper and I don't even remember what the paper was on. That's hard, hard to say, but I do remember meeting Tony.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was so impressed with him. And at that point in time, I was working as the fiction editor of the Chattahoochee, which I did for I think about 3 or 4 years before I ended up resigning for reasons that are not related to the journal. But I remember Tony because anybody who knows Tony knows that first of all, he's just a wonderful person who emanates goodness. I mean, he walks in the room and you feel that,
Right.
he's
Right.
just a lovely person. And then, I ended up finding out that he was a writer, and I read Bombing Him, and he's a fantastic writer. And then the last Townsend Prize that I directed, his book, The Bane Conversation, as one of yours was as well, was a finalist for the Townsend. So I think of him in some ways as sort of bookending, my time in Atlanta in terms of the literary community. But he's fabulous. And I got to know him, I guess, through the years, via the Chattahoochee Review. And then I guess about 10 years ago, when I was working for the Chattahoochee Review, I was also helping revive a high school creative writing competition that we had. And we had a speaker lined up for that event who got very ill on the day of the event, or the day before, I think the day before the event, and couldn't come. And so I had like 24 hours to find a great speaker. And one of the first people that I thought about was Tony.
Yeah.
So I called Tony and he graciously agreed to do it.
Yeah.
So he's just, yeah, he's wonderful. So I was very honored to be part of the first, um, story contest in his name and his honor.
Yeah. Well, we were very fortunate to have you, and we appreciate you volunteering to do it. And yeah, he just was kind of my introduction into the whole thing here in Atlanta. I've met a lot of great people because of him. Very generous guy, to be sure.
Very.
And
Very.
yes, and okay. Well, now can I? Do you have a couple of pieces to read for us today, Anna?
I do. I have a whole book, but I don't think you have time. So I think I'll just choose a couple of them. How about that?
Okay, and I'm just gonna step back when you start. And again, I just thank you so much. You're a great friend, and but also for helping us out here. We
Well,
really
thank you.
appreciate
It was my honor and privilege, like I said, and a total joy to celebrate Tony. So, and writing for that matter. So I'm going to read a couple of pieces from the Flash collection. They're both about 500 words. And then I might read a one-liner, as I call them right now as well, to end. So this first piece is called Codependency, Animals Included. My sister has a pair of fake alligator boots that come up to her thighs. Tonight, on pills, she is only a little high. Thigh high, she says, and asks me for them. I pull them from her closet and hold them out to her. No, you, she says, flopping her head against her pillow. I tug the first one on under my second job uniform, smeared with food stains from the dinner shift. My skin sticks, but not too much. He wants your other leg too, she says. When I ask who, she answers, the gator. She sits up and reaches to touch the boot's opening. That's his mouth, she says. Her eyes have that glaze, that belief. So I tug on the second boot, avoiding the teeth, but feeding the beast. On cue, my sister, who needs more money than I can make, gets a job at a car wash. It is famous for its mascot, a robotic gorilla that waves at passing cars. I am so proud that I wave back. I am so proud that I stop and treat myself to the deluxe wash and wax, rims included, but at the car wash a few blocks away, the one with no mascot at all. I am Jane Goodall in reverse. I find the glass pipe between the couch's cushions, my sister in the kitchen slumped against a cabinet on the floor. She wears ancient tattered jeans, hand-me-downs from me, and ridiculously, a sports bra. She curls her body into a ball, head to the floor. I count 14 vertebrae in her spine, 2 more than the number of steps she's not taken in her addiction program. I'm a cat toy, she says, her voice muffled against the tile. Where's the cat? Under her fingernails is a dark arc of dirt and DNA that I share. I don't mind the dirt. I call the cat Tinkers, but she's hiding. I bend over and swipe at my sister's arm, wishing for claws that I know I never would use. Meow, I say. A letter arrives from my sister. She opens it and reveals I want you back plea from an old boyfriend who shows up later with his pit bull and a collar covered with hearts and peace signs. Only he's not an old boyfriend, but an old dealer. I wonder what it's like to have someone like him, someone who loves you. The dog, I mean. I take my sister to goat yoga. The monkey's still on her back. She drops to all fours, but the goat just bleats and bleats, not moving as if to ask, and just where am I going to go with that monkey there? My sister knows what I'm thinking, swings her stringy black at the roots hair as if to answer, to hell, and smiles. Welcome, I say to the goat, offering my sister a smug smirk because I am, after all, hell's hostess extraordinaire. Happy, happy, hospitable hell. I rub my sister's feet, though it is mine that hurt. Separating each toe, I see needle punctures. Ashamed that I've let it get this far, I recite the famous nursery rhyme anyway, ending with, this little piggy called wee, 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 all the way home. Wee, 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 all the way home. Of course, that's we spelled with a W-E, the last
Yeah.
line.
Yes. Yes.
But I figured you got that.
Yep.
So this second one is from a little of the research I was doing on trees online, and I discovered that there's a famous tree in Australia called the boab tree that's 1,500 years old that apparently back in the 1800s was used, or so the legend goes, it's not been proven, as like a holding cell for indigenous prisoners on their way to sentencing. Whether or not that's true has never been validated, but anyway, it's an interesting story. So it's called a prison tree. It isn't. A prison tree. It isn't. My man Cyril is locked up for loving and then unloving. His fists were involved. Another woman. I send him gift boxes to help unload my anger. I write his name in red Sharpie. Cyril, sit your ass in prison, Williams. Underneath, I write the address of the Alexander Correctional Institution, Taylorsville, North Carolina, in big loopy letters that suggest wide open spaces. I mean, a car could drive through my O's. On the back of the box, I draw the sun like a kid would, a yellow circle with triangular rays around it. According to Cyril, who calls me collect once a week from the prison phone, the sun barely finds the tiny window in his cell. According to Cyril, my drawing is so bad that my son looks more like a cog in a machine. That's me, all right, he says, turning the wheels of justice. Every week, I tell Cyril that concerning what's inside the gift boxes, I'm open to requests. Now, baby, he says first, you just fold your pretty little self into one and finally get on up here to see me. Clothing optional. Then that unmagical sweet talk over, he'll request something practical, something possible. He requests cookies and cigarettes. I send one stale Oreo and a pamphlet on lung cancer. He requests dental floss and a truck magazine. I send a piece of white thread I pulled from all the way around his collar of his favorite sweatshirt and a Tonka toy catalog from 1989. He requests the name of a good lawyer. I send a flea market gavel. He requests my forgiveness. I send a "Don't mess with Texas" bumper sticker, though I have never been and don't see any need to go to Texas. Then 3 Wednesdays pass and no phone calls from Cyril, no requests, no gift boxes. I draw bad suns on receipts at the cleaners where I work, drag my anger around like a fat tail, and miss Cyril, which is like missing a fat tail made of rage. I start thinking about minutes to hours to days to weeks to months to forever and realize that everything has a color but time. I think about hunger, one kind stacked mean on other kinds. I think about concrete and a mattress as hard as a fist. When Cyril finally calls, his voice sounds like someone is pinching it. He wants to know if there's such a thing as a prison tree. The guy in here says it's in Australia. It's hollow and was used for lockup or something like that. Or maybe it's not even real. Maybe it's a myth. I need to know it's just a myth. What I've been thinking, Cyril's been living. I don't look it up. I put my phone down. Cyril's still talking about how he needs to know. I find a box and cut a hole in the top so that the sapling I take him will have room to grow. Forget the practical, the possible. If forgiveness is magic, then that tree will tower above everything from the prison all the way to Texas. Okay, and so this is one of those little one-liners that I mentioned earlier. There's a series in my flash collection of animals speaking to God, and one line per animal. And this one is, said the sloth to God. Hanging upside down, I am pointed toward hell. So I try to envision heaven, though so far it is slow going.
Bravo.
Thank
Bravo.
you.
Thank you, Anna, so much. It's great seeing
Thank
you.
you. Yeah, it's good to see you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.